Welcome back. Now, of course, on Wednesday, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana delivered his medium-term policy budget statement. And COSATU, of course, an alliance partner of the ANC and the biggest trade union within South Africa, said that it was disappointed with the Finance Minister's budget speech. It was not a surprise. Like I mentioned, Gondongwana tabled the MTBPS. And of course, it spoke of a lot of changes that they would like to see from a government perspective if they want to see growth occurring in terms of the GDP. Joining me now, I'd like to welcome Matthew Parks, who's COSATU's parliamentary coordinator. Mr. Parks, always a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us. Good afternoon.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. Mr. Parks, I think a lot of the discussion has been with regards to the austerity measures that government were looking at. COSATU, you were joined by other trade unions in picketing outside of Parliament ahead of the budget. Was there an impression with regards to these changes to austerity measures?
I think we were disappointed. I mean, we appreciate how difficult the state finances are right now. But if we want to really turn things around, we want to get ourselves in a better footing, then I think we need to take a fundamentally different approach. The approach in the budget and over many years has simply been to say we need to reduce expenditure so we can pay down the debt. Our approach is different, that we need to grow the economy, we need to create jobs, because that's going to generate the taxes that the state requires to fund public services, to fix the state, and of course to pay down the debt. But I think for us, we believe Treasury wants to put the cart before the horse, possibly even to sell the horse. And I think for our approach that we need to have the horse in front of the cart, we need to feed the horse and give the horse all the resources it requires to move forward. And we've been, kind of treading water for quite some time. The reality is we have a 1% economic growth rate, which is not enough to reduce unemployment. We have a rising unemployment rate, which is about 42.6%. And, the kind of cut the expenditure, hope things will get better approach doesn't generate the confidence or the growth we need. And we've been, going through this process for quite some time, and it just hasn't delivered the results. And so we had hoped to see a bit of a shift from government to be much more aggressive, to be stimulating the economy, to be fixing the state, and to create the jobs we need to improve our lives.
Yeah, I want to touch on that because obviously, a few weeks ago, I had your colleague spokesperson of COSATU, Zanele Sapela, here. And the discussion was, it was just 2 days after, COSATU had that nationwide strike. And it felt as if there was no real hard approach in trying to solve that 42.6% unemployment rate. It just seems as if, government is running in this maze, but there isn't really a sense of a proper direction in terms of that.
That's what we fear most, because in the budget, they project over the next 3-4 years, on average, about a 1.7% GDP growth rate. So that means we're accepting that we'll have an unemployment rate of about 40%. And that for us is national suicide. We just can't continue on this path. There is progress, and we must commend government, for example, on overcoming load shedding. That's critical. That adds about 1% of GDP growth. We need to do more similar support to Transnet, because that can help unlock mining, manufacturing, agricultural sectors, job-intensive industries, a huge source of revenue for the state. We need to give similar support to build upon the progress that Metro Rail has achieved in terms of reopening our lines, because that can help boost the urban economy by enabling workers to get to work quickly and efficiently and cheaply. We need to see real interventions. We haven't seen them at a pace and scale we need to turn local government around, because the municipalities don't provide essential services like water, sanitation, electricity, roads, and so forth. Many companies were closing our rural towns, sending workers into the unemployment queue. So we have seen some progress, but not at the pace and scale we need to really turn things around, and to turn things around urgently.
I want to touch on state-owned entities, and you've brought it up. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, in a SCOPA meeting, you've got Michelle Phillips, the Transnet CEO, saying that, look, we've got a turnaround plan. Give us some time. South African Airways would have hoped to have gotten 5 billion, and they're saying that this could be, bringing them to even. And then, of course, you've got Eskom, which is, they've just released a report saying, well, South Africa, there'll still be power for the next 5 years, and it can be in conjunction with the provised growth that they're looking at. No bailouts for the SOEs. Is that a thumbs up or a thumbs down from a COSATU perspective?
Look, I mean, it's a difficult thing. Government spends huge amounts of money bailing out SOEs, and we appreciate, that pathway can only take you so far. But I think for us, it's not just about bailouts, and it's also about interventions too to give support. So, for example, we need to be giving support to Eskom to ensure that municipalities pay Eskom the money that is owed to it. Eskom loses about 40 billion rand a year. Municipal debt is currently 80 billion rand. So, resolve that issue so Eskom can have the resources it requires to invest in its power capacity, invest in transmission and distribution lines, etc. So you don't always have to do a bailout. At times you've got to address the key issues. Similarly, around addressing issues of cable theft, of corruption, of mismanagement, etc. Transnet too needs support to deal with cable theft, to ensure that all those signals, all those lines are fully operational. It needs support to modernize its infrastructure at its ports, to have modern cranes, to reskill the staff, etc. To invest in something as simple as IT systems as well. So it doesn't always have to be a bailout, but you do need to give support, but we don't have limitless time. We need to see incremental progress all the time. We're not saying we expect miracles overnight, but we've got to see progress. So at Eskom, we have seen progress. We need to build upon it. We have seen some progress at Transnet. Metro Rail, we've got to do much faster in that regard. But we're emphasizing those key industries because if you're going to address them, you add about 1 to 2 to 2.5% GDP growth to the economy. And that helps to create jobs, it helps to save jobs, it helps to bring revenue into the state, into the economy, etc. But I don't think we'd continue on a business as usual path. That's what our fear is that the government is doing. And the fixation around reducing expenditure, it actually might backfire because you reduce the capacity of the state to provide the quality public services that society depends upon. So, for example, you reduce the wage bill. All you achieve in that regard is to send skilled workers like nurses, paramedics, doctors, teachers, police officers into better paying jobs in the private sector or overseas, further weaken the capacity of the state. We have a huge vacancy rate in Home Affairs, yet we wonder why Home Affairs struggles to produce ID and other civic services timely. So I think for us, invest in the quality of the capacity of the state to deliver the goods. You will return a much greater amount in economic growth afterwards.
Mr. Paxton, I wanted to touch on public servants because this has been a contentious issue. It's been a to and fro with regards to government, and of course, COSATU, you are in the thick of things with regards to that. What was your sort of reaction to Minister Godongwana's take on public servants? I mean, you've just mentioned, got Home Affairs where there's a huge skills gap that is required right over there, and yet there seems to be no real priority in trying to fix that when it is essential. For example, the distribution or the distribution of the applications of IDs and so much and so forth.
Yeah. So look, there's been a myth by politicians that the state is bloated. In 1994, we had 34 million South Africans, 1 million public servants. Today, we have 64 million South Africans, 1.2 million public servants. So the state is not bloated. But we have about 70,000 vacancies. Some institutions like Home Affairs have a 60% vacancy rate. We've seen the headcount of police officers declining by about 15%. We've seen the ratio of health workers, of teachers to society rising. People will say the wage bill is out of control, and again, it's not true. The wage bill was stable at 35% of the budget since 2008, until 2 years ago. That's in line with international norms. It wasn't growing. And in the last 2 years after budget cuts, it's declined to 31%. So there's a danger if we continue to squeeze nurses and teachers, all we'll do is to see more people leaving, and you're not going to resolve the fundamental issues. We have seen in Eskom, if you invest in the capacity of the state, it can turn around. We've seen in South Africa's Revenue Service, appoint competent management, remove criminal, corrupt elements, fill vacancies, and invest in the capacity. And the return on investment the society gets, yes, you have to spend money, but you'll get much more money back because businesses will grow, the economy grows, and that generates the revenue the state requires. So looking for shortcuts, it doesn't lead to anywhere.
Mr. Parks, before we close off this conversation, the next, of course, main budget speech, February 2025. I know 3 months is a very short period, but what would COSATU like to see within this 3-month period that can have some sort of positive trend in terms of growing the country's economy?
I think to maintain the support we've given to Eskom, but accelerate it, especially on municipal debt, to give more support to Transnet and Metro Rail to be fully operational, because that is a huge impact. We have to be much more aggressive on our local government. The deterioration there is very scary. There's a very good infrastructure program, but we need to make sure that it's spent correctly. We do need to really invest in public services. And again, it's going to be beneficial to society. And whilst we grow the economy, we should be extending relief to the unemployed, to the poor, by raising the SRD grant to the food poverty line, linking its recipients to skills and employment opportunities, and by also expanding, not decreasing, but increasing the presidential promise stimulus to help young people have a pathway to enter the labor market, to earn a wage, to gain the skills and the experience and the confidence required to find permanent work. And I think those are the kind of the high impact interventions that can yield an immediate benefit to the economy, to society. And I think lastly, also to invest in the South African Revenue Service to boost tax compliance from 64% to 70%, because that will generate the revenue the state requires to fund public services.
Mr. Parks, always a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
That's Matthew Parks, COSATU's parliamentary coordinator. And of course, we've got 3 months till the main budget speech. Very short time, but a lot's going to be demanded and expected at the same time from the National Treasury. That's all we have for you here on News in Focus. Do have yourself a good weekend, but most importantly, a safe one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.